Okay, and so last week we talked about the components in Vue, and we talked a little bit about the simple components. How do you create one? Need to register, and then we talked about how do you passing data between the parent and child components, and using the props and the events, special events. Okay, and we're going to talk a bit more about the components. Continue about components today. Okay, so we're talking something again about slots and then dynamic components. And we're going to talk about Vue CLI, which is the command line interface for Vue. Some of you have been using that already, and we're going to only just to start introducing them now. And then very importantly, after that, we're going to talk about the single file component, and which is one of the kind of important features of Vue, made it quite popular. And finally, we'll try to refactory the pet shop with components. So far, the pet shop is just in one big file, and we're going to break that into different components and make it more manageable, which is one of the main purpose of having components. And obviously here, we're going to be using the single file component, which is covered before that. Okay, and so the slot, and the slot is, so far when we try to use a predefined component, you can use it almost like HTML tag, but the difference is you cannot put something in between. For example, and for the p paragraph from HTML, you can always add actual text in there, whereas in our cases, you will just say and the starting tag and ending tag without anything in between. That's how we have been using the components so far. And you could actually manually to add something. You can say starting tag my components, this is my components, and then say slash closing my component tag. But basically the text you put there will be ignored. Yeah. And so this is exactly what would happen. And you can add something in between, and but the text will not display on the page. It will be simply ignored. Let me do maybe here. Okay. Okay. And if you want to do this as a way to pass some information or data to your components, you can do that actually. And previously we're using um, props. Props works more like the property or attributes of element. You would inside the tag, you would say text equal to something, or price or title equal to something. That's a bit different. And this one is put in between the tags. Okay. And so this is the one way to pass the data from the parent to child without using props. Okay, and so, okay, we're going to do a very simple example here. Can I move? No, okay. So imagine we need to pass and two bits of information and from parent to the child component, and the information we need to pass is author and title. And so this is the definition of our component, and the component is probably going to be called form component. In its template, it has a form, and you have two input fields, and you have the label for these input fields. So, and the label would say for title, that means that's for this particularly text field, but actually the text displayed in the label would be passed onto the component using props. And so you can see it has two props and called title and author, and these will be used here to display. And when we actually using the form component, and you say, well, bind author, which is this props to a particular value. In this case, is called author label. Itself could be a uh, itself could be a variable or data property, view data property as well. And similarly, we bind title to a different, say, view data property called title label. Okay, and then, yes. So this is the rest of the view code. In this case, uh, you define these two here. Okay, and let me just create this quickly and in the Visual Studio Code. Ah, need to close this one. Let's open a new one. Let's do this in download. No, here. Okay, and we'll create a new file. Um, this will called. Um, so okay, and is the text now visible, big enough to see? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we had this simple one. Okay.
So slightly bigger if possible, please.
Even bigger. Okay.
Slightly bigger. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. And then we might start with the view part. And so inside the body, we have a script. And in the script part, we'll define a new view instance. And it's going to be linked to this element with ID called app, which we're going to define a little bit later on. And it will need components. And in this case, we're going to call it and form component. And the definition is form component. Again, which will be added a little bit later. So that's the component registration part. And after that, okay, let me make this part a bit smaller so I have a bit more space on this side. Yeah, and we also need the data. As we mentioned, now we always define data as a function rather than a property like this, and just say that's the way you have to do it in components. And the only exception is the root component. But just to make it consistent, we were always using and data as a function now. So we'll define two data properties, and this basically just two strings. I use one is called the title label, the other one is called author label, and just purely because that's what it meant to be. Okay, and then if we go back, hopefully I typed everything correct. Um, I need to define the actual component. So that's what goes in here. So this is just a form component. And so this is just a JSON object. But it's actually including the definition of all the this particularly form component. Yeah, this is a bit tricky things here, and I have to type everything in one line, I believe, and then because otherwise, and it will complain for title. And also the auto completion does not quite work here either. Oh, I can't use this. Well, I can use this. Text. So that close that. And then have another label. This time the label will be for author. Let me see if I can break into separate line as well. Okay. Yeah. So that's better. Yeah, that's far better. And that's the second label. Yeah. Okay. And so the difference is here, I used not the single quote, but the I don't know, the other, like the higher level, the something looks like a single quote, but not the other one. And then it allow you to type everything else. And you could use single quote, but then you can't have, say, line breaks or single quote again inside your template. So I'm gonna just use that and then close it out, which makes it much easier. And so this is for author, and it's gonna display author and close the label.
So on Mac, is that the button next to Z, sir?
Yes, exactly, to the left of that.
All right, so thank
Yeah,
you.
and we're gonna have final input equal to. So that's the input field type equal to text. And now we can close the form. Okay, so that defines the template. And then after that, we need to define the props we're going to use. We need a comma, sorry, yeah. Props, and we will need two. One is called title, the other one will be called author. So once you define these, then you can use them here, the double curly bracket title and double curly bracket also. Okay, and then finally, we just needed the actual div element. This will be called app. And inside, we're going to have our form component. Yeah, it recognized. And so you could do it this way. I think it also works if you don't have the closing tag. You just put it slash here. That should also work. And the important thing is that now we have to bind the author, which is this second property here, and to author label, which is this property we define here. So that basically will pass the value of author label to the components. And similarly, we need to give title the value of probably is title label. Yeah. Okay, and then that should work now. And we can run this. Live server. Okay, it doesn't show, so we need to see where. Oh, there's two errors. Okay, view is not defined. Okay, we forgot to including the view library file http pkg view. Okay, yeah, and so now it's no more errors. Stop complaining. And as you can see on this side, so these are two text fields, but the label before the text field, which is this label, and this label here, they are now displayed with the text defined here, the title and the author. Okay, and so this is how you do it with props, which is what we covered and in the lecture last week. Okay, now we're gonna try to do this and using slot, which will be slightly different. Okay, and so if we look at the code, form component are still the same, and so that's where we add a slot. Okay, and so this will be whatever the user typed in will be shown under here. Okay, and how do I say? So if we come back here, so in the template now we adding a slot, so that will allow us to get some text from the parent component, and then we're gonna pass this to the component, and that will be you replace what the slot is here. So now I have to actually need the open and the closing tag now. So I need to close this one. And then now I can put in something here. So it's not just text, you can put in some HTML code as well. And it's just a book author form. Okay, and then this, which I put in between the open and closing tag of the custom component, and will be used to replace wherever the slot is in the template. So now you have this, and book author form, and if I take out h1, it will just be text, I assume book author form, and which is not particularly nice. And I can make it, or maybe h3 something. Yeah, and you can have the book author form. Okay.
So, sir, a slot is used just for displaying whatever we like to write in the code between the tags form component.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm gonna explain the difference between slots and the props in a second. And but in short, and the slot allows you, the props is meant for data, and the slot is the advantage is you can, for example, using something like h3 tag, which is not possible to pass using props. For example, if you need to control the element type and formatting as well, then the props will be, sorry, the slot will be better. Yeah, and so we already saw this, and the slot in the template is where the text between the opening and closing tags will appear. In this case will be this part is between the open and closing tag. Yeah, so we passed not just the text, which is book author form, but also some tags, HTML tags as well. And that's h1, which is what we start with. Here we change that to h3. Okay, so that's the main difference. So it allows you to pass HTML templates, so you can pass more complex thing, just say a text string. So if you just want to pass, say, a number or a string, or even just a string, normal string, then, or maybe even a JSON object, then props will be the right way to do. Because, for example, it cannot really pass a JSON object. And also, if you need more than one, in this case, for example, I need both title and author, and you can't do that either. For the slot, you can only do one. But the advantage of using slot is that you can add in some HTML, for example, even some formatting inside the tag as well. You can say style, and style and color blue. I mean, not say you should do this. It's usually not a good thing, but also these are the things you can pass in, and that is, you can potentially do that with props as well, but will be more complex, and it's much easier to do in using slot this way. Okay, and then as we said before, and if you just use slot this way, you can only have one, passing one. And if you want to have multiple HTML templates that you want to pass to a component, and each template will display at a different location, and you can use named slot. And if you essentially give, and if you have multiple slots you want to use in one template, you need to give each a name, then you can differentiate which slot is getting which piece of data or the template. Okay, and so this is the form component. Okay, so now in the template we will add two named slot. So we have this generic one, then we add two other slots, and then that's used to replace the label. So we had a label before, now we're not using them. Instead, we're going to using a slot. So essentially, we don't need this label anymore, or this one. But instead, we're going to using a slot with a name. So we're going to do, does this work? No. So I have to type slot name equal to title slot. Can I just close like this? Let's see. So that's my first named slot. It has a name. We still have the same input afterwards. And then we'll have a second slot here. Actually, the third one now. And in our code, we have the first one, which is here, which doesn't have name. The second one have name called the title slot. And the next one called author slot. Okay. And okay, then we come up to the view part, and the components is still the same definition. Okay. We also have something called a header now. Okay, that's interesting. So we have a header, which is book author form. Okay. So we have three slots now in this particular template. The first one is anonymous one, which is this one here. It doesn't have a name. It's just called a slot. And the second one is a named one. It has a name and called title slot. And the third one is also named one, and which is called author slot. Okay, and then there are also three HTML templates in the form component. And hang on, we not okay. And so basically, when we want to use these, and we need to basically we have three slots, and then we need to pass to it three pieces of HTML elements. So for the first one, we just give it a header, and which is essentially just this. That's for the anonymous slot, and we're going to do for the okay. This is the label for title, so and slot equal to title slot. So that says this will be for the title slot, and we're going to using title label, and which again just using this value here for the title slot. Okay, so basically this entire thing, entire label element will be passed onto the value for the second slot. So as we said, for slot, we can pass in HTML elements so that we can including, say, the tag itself as well. And similarly, we can do this. And for the next slot, so we'll just say, for the last one, for author, we say label for author slot equal to author slot, double curly bracket, and author label, and then close the label. Okay.
Question, sir.
Yeah.
So in the anonymous slot, we can add more extra, HTML code, whatever we want. So it's gonna be like included in the anonymous slot. Like if I wanna add in apart from H1, I wanna add H2 as well, or paragraph and all that, it will be included in the anonymous slot.
And it doesn't matter. You can include that in any of the slot. And the anonymous just means it doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
And you can include in multiple levels. So for example, here, and so we're going to do H1 and then say header. And so that's going to be passed onto the first slot here. So this is still where I'm using my components, and this will be the text in between. So that will be, and here it's probably not showing yet because it's gonna get errors, I assume.
We need to define the header.
Headers are misspelled here. Header, yeah. So that's fine. And currently, I don't have any values for these two slots yet, so I need to add to them. So the way to add them to them, you have to say slot equal to title slot, then no SS fund for this one. So and here I say, actually maybe I'll be fast. Label for title and slot equal to title slot. So this one has name has to match this. And then inside, we're going to use another data property from the title label. I mean, it could be more complex here. For example, and let's say I'll put a div and then a paragraph and then all these things. That's also possible. It can get quite complex with a named slot as well, and so long as it's valid. So that's why it shows up here. And if I take out the paragraph and the div, and so basically it removes any new lines, just continues. And label for this, and you can change, for example, color. And finally, we need to add another one. in this case, it's still another label. This time, we're going to be for the other text field called author. And then the slot will be matched to a name. This is called author slot. And again, we're going to be using the, I think it's called author label. Yeah. Then this entire thing will be passed to replace this part of the code. So you should see the authors there. Okay, and so doing something quite similar as before, maybe a bit different in the sense, previously we can only using slot to replace this one, but now we can use slot to reformat or redefine these two as well. So we can do more than one. So allow you to have more than one slot being passed onto the component. And does that answer the question? I thought there was a question in terms of how complex what you can pass onto. And so long as it's a valid HTML template, then it should be okay. Okay, and yeah, so just come back to this and whether we should use slot or and props. And the slot is for HTML template. And so if that's what you need, and you should use slot, and prop is for data. So you pass numbers, strings, and arrays, or even objects. But for the arrays and objects, you have to be careful because for those, you can potentially change them, change the values inside the child component. Okay, and they can replace each other in some cases. For example, if you just need a text string, and it can be either passed as data or HTML, and that's no problem. So if you want to do and pass HTML template, and slot is better, for example, the h1 and the label tags or any other HTML tags, basically, you can use. Okay, and also there's other slightly less thing is you don't need to write the bind for the slots. For example, if you remember for the props, we have the title and author, and then in the code when actually using it, you have to say bind these ones. So you don't need to do these. And for the props, sorry, for the slots, but you do need, say, to write something like slot equal to slot title slot or slot equal to author slot, which is kind of equivalent of binding that value to the props. Okay. Okay, and so that's about slot, and it's optional. In summary, I think if you want to pass some HTML template to a component, then the slot will be the ideal case. And in most other cases, and prop will probably be sufficient. Okay, and then we're gonna move on to an dynamic component. So what it allows you to do is allows you to choose which component to use. Okay, and so for example, you can create an app, has a button, and you click the button and it will change the component being displayed. I mean, this is actually quite similar to what we did for the pet shop example. We have this checkout button, which you click, and then it becomes show the checkout page, and you click it again, that goes back to the product list. So imagine if you have the product list and the checkout page as two components, and you can just click the button and to choose which button or which component to show. So this is what the dynamic component is, allows you to change which one to show. And here it shows this is what the initial app look like. You have a button, and this is a component displayed by default. And then if you click the button, it will change from this component to the other one, which is the form component. And if you click again, it will change to a third component called header. Okay, and we're going to have a quick look of how do we create this. Okay, let me quickly rename this. So I'll probably call this one slot, and let's this one called dynamic component. Okay, need to do my usual thing. Okay, as you can see, this will be the dynamic component demo. I'm gonna to remember to include the script this time. PKG. Okay, and in the body, we're gonna just create a simple div with a button. When the button is clicked, it will run this function called a cycle. And what it is going to change the value of current view in the cycle. And this is where the dynamic component is going to come in. Depends on the value of current view, a different components will be used. Okay, so let's do this. Div id equal to app, and then we'll have a button, or just say at click equal to cycle. This is the second cycle here. It is a text shows in the button. So this one is the important one. It's a method we're going to call in the view, and what it will have an impact on is here, and we're going to have this component and is equal to current view. Okay, and so first, and because the component itself is going to change, so we don't know which component is going to be yet. So we can't put the name of component like here, say my component or also label or something. It just will be called component. And this is a way to allow you to choose which one. And then click the button or this function, the event handler would change the value of this current view, which decides which components get be added here. Okay, so now we need to go to the three component. Okay, so we're gonna then we need the actual oh, we don't need the source. And so first we're just gonna define three components. So that's when we click the button here. These three components will be cycled here. So one get displayed at a time. So book component. Okay, so here we probably use the simplest possible component we can, which is just a simple line of text. But you can easily imagine you can put more content or even more functions in here. So again, let's just only have a template which just says this is the form component. Okay, and finally we have the last header component. Okay, our capital, just to be consistent. And again, template. We're going to be using, yeah, header component. Oh, okay. And then we're going to using the actual view. The most important part of the view is the cycle function, which will change the value of the current view. Okay. And we're going to come back to this in a second, but let's just first define the view instance. Okay, and it's going to link to the element with the ID called app. And then the data here, okay, I'm going to register the components first before we go on to. So we have three components, book component. I think I explained last week, and say the name of the component cannot have capital, and it's much better to have hyphen in there. So you could have something like this as a name, just because HTML does not recognize capital. Whereas here in the JavaScript code, that's fine. That's why we can create the definition of the component with capital letters. And once you define the name given to the component, you always use hyphen and lower cases. Okay, that's our first one. Oops, that's not very nice. Okay, and our second one will be called form component. And so we're going to just use form. And finally, we have the header. And this definition is going to come from header components. Okay, and so that registers all the components we need. And next is the data, as we starting to get used to now. So all these data has to be defined as a function, and the actual values and will be and included in the return. So we're going to have defined the current view as one of the data properties. So we want to start with book component. So I say book component. And if you want to start with one of other ones, then that's also fine. Okay, so that's our data. And then come to the methods section. We're going to only have the method called the cycle, which is the one that will be run every time when the button is clicked. It's going to run cycle. And okay, so it just basically says if the currently it is head component, and you change that to book. So basically, if it's book, go to form. If it's form, go to header. If it's header, go to book. Okay, and you could write this as three conditions, and here it's just slightly more compact way to say, and it says if the current view is header, which is the last one, we're going to change back to the first one, which is book component. If this dot current view equal to header, then what we will do is I'm gonna say or change that into book component. Otherwise, this dot current view. Okay, and so this is again this, I forgot what the name for this is now. And what we are using here is just a shorthand way to write if this, if else. That's all. Okay, and this is slightly convoluted in the sense, and this part is used to change the value of this current view, and then this part is the if else. It says if this current view equal to book component, if that's true, and we'll return this value. So the this dot current view would become form component. So if it's book, it goes back to form. And then otherwise, that means if it's not book component and it's not head component, must be a form. And then we're going to change that to header component. Okay, I think that's everything. Yeah. So now if we run the code, this is called, okay, might be easier, dynamic component. Okay, so we can turn this off now. So looks okay. If I, the first one, because the default one, the, sorry, the initial value here for the current view is book component. That's why you should book here. Click once, that changes to form. Click again, goes to header, and you can just keep cycling through all these. Yeah, and obviously you can imagine this is a button that says checkout, and you click, you replace the product into a checkout, which is built into a component, and you click again and get back to say the product. Let me just check how we are doing in time. Yeah. Okay, so now we're actually gonna try to rebuild the pet shop and with components. And so one of the reasons to do this is so far we had the pet shop as one file. It's getting too big, and then we're gonna refactor it and but break it into different components and make it more maintainable. And this is also allow you to reuse a component, and probably not in this case. And but as the apps gets bigger, it's more likely to be a chance to reuse the same thing. Okay, but we actually what gonna use is something called a single file component, and which we haven't covered so far. And it's still a component, but the component we created so far is all look like this. It doesn't live in separate files, and also its script and sorry, and its template and say any JavaScript code or CSS formatting would all live this way. Whereas single file component is slightly different. And so first, and it's a fairly unique feature of Vue and make it quite useful. Okay, and so the routing part we're probably not gonna do, and because we don't have time to cover it, so we're gonna just use single file component to try to rebuild and the front end of the pet shop. So we're gonna introduce single file component, and it has a unique file extension called .vue. So it's not .js, .html anymore, and it's a different file type. excuse me, and it has all the things you need for a component: the HTML template, JavaScript code, and any CSS formatting if there's any. And so each one has its own scope, and this is particularly useful for the CSS. So the CSS rules will only apply to the HTML code in that particularly. And similarly for the JavaScript code, it only be referred to the elements in that template. So allows you to isolate the components, will not make sure they don't interfere each other. Okay, and so this is what a single file component looks like. And so everything this is one file, and you have the template part, the HTML template part, which is start and closed with the template tag. So this is like a new tag which doesn't exist in HTML. And the JavaScript part is the same, and you still use a script tag to define this is my JavaScript code. And finally, you have the style tag to put in any CSS formatting. And usually you would add in scoped here, just to say, all these formatting and only applies to this HTML code here, or this HTML template here. So will not impact any other template. For example, you can define, say, a rule, say what the class hello does, and a different component can have its own class, also called hero, sorry, hello, but with different definitions. Okay, and so before we can run one of this file, and we need to introduce view CRI. And one of the reason is because you cannot open .view file in the browser. As we mentioned, the single file component, or SFC, and its file ends at .view, which the browser doesn't understand. And then what you need to do is you need to transpile the .view file into a collection of HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, which are the file types that is understood by the browser, and it can open those. Okay, and you don't need to do this manually, and the view CRI can do this for you, and that's the reason why we need the view CRI. So the CRI stands for a command line interface, and essentially you open the command window, you have to type in there. That's how you use and interact with it. Okay, and then also the view CRI can help you to create the scaffold of your app. So some of you might be using this already, and I think in some of the online tutorials they would start with this instead of the one we have been using so far, is just to add this line of code. And you can use view CRI to create an app for you. Then it will create the substructure and the common files for you. And all these are mostly to start, and we're going to see examples very soon. Okay, and obviously the first thing you need to do is to install Vue CLI. And if you haven't done that yet, and to test this, and just run this command, which returns the, okay, let me get my terminal, which returns the version of, couldn't get my, okay, yeah. Which returns the version of the Vue on your machine or in your system if it's being installed. So, okay. And is this text large enough? Oops.
Visible enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not this one. Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Just tiny bit bigger. Yeah. And so I can just type the same thing, the view. So it shows you the view. Okay, so that means I'm already installed. Otherwise, you would get an error message say view is not recognized as a command. Okay, and come back here. So if it's not installed, it will get a message like this. And so this is on Mac, so you have the ZSH before, and the Windows will be something similar. Okay, and if you don't have them, you have to just install them, and it's just a node package. So you say npm install -g. G means install globally. That means everywhere, you can use it everywhere, not in a particular directory. And at view/CRI, that means so installing CRI, view CRI. Okay, and this is what you do on Mac or Linux. And this part is the same, but usually you will need a sudo, which allow you to write to the system files part of the on your disk. Usually you would not be able to use or not allowed to do that. You'll get say access or permission error when you try to install. And this part is exactly the same. Okay, and it's actually not that small, and it takes a couple of minutes on my MacBook. It's quite a lot of files to download. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why we actually just using this to start with, because that's much lighter weight. You don't have to install anything, and also it's almost instant if you're online. Okay, and then once you installed the view CRI, and it will allow you to turn .view file into HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, which then can be opened in the browser. So that was called transpile. But you can also run .view file directly, okay, without going through the transpile process. And for that, you need to install another thing called the CRI service global. That's just like another node module. And so you're probably familiar by this by now, in the sense, and it's still part of the view, but instead of just called CRI, it says CRI service global, and that requires view CRI to be installed first. So you need to run this first, then you can install this service global. Okay, and after that, you will be able to run a view file without transpiling, just typing view serve. So view is the tools you installed, and the serve is almost like say npm run followed by say app.js. Here you say view, which is a tool, and that's your kind of command from the tools, and the name of the file you want to run. Okay. Oh, okay. And let's do this one. So we can save the previous one example and then start that one using the code. So a few slides back, we saw this sample. Let's create one now. So I'm gonna just create this one. Okay, and I just got called example.view. So you can see you need .view extension now. It's no longer HTML or CSS or JavaScript. And you can also see in here, in my case, it's already recognized. You can see a view icon, and that's because I installed an extension that allows me to recognize all these view. Can I make this bigger? No. How about now?
So
Yeah.
what's the name of the extension, please?
Okay, so the one I installed is called Viewter, and it has many other things.
Yeah.
But if you just search view, there's quite a few other things you can use as well. Maybe sometimes just the syntax highlighting for view file is already, and because otherwise, the Visual Studio Code doesn't understand how to process .view files. There's many
Yeah,
extensions available there.
Vuter is
Yeah,
useful. I have been using it as well,
yeah.
and I have the same.
Vuter, yeah, is kind of the common one. This kind of more comprehensive one. It almost have everything related to Vue you will need to being there. Okay, and let's get back to the actual file. So obviously, let me make this slightly smaller. Uh, collapse the side part. Okay, so this is our first. So you need template, and inside the template, okay, okay. Let's just say we have a div, and inside div we just show message, which will be defined and in our script part. And then that's the second part is the script part and export default. This is just actually just define this as a JavaScript module, and we'll give it a name. That's the name of this components. Essentially, there's a component we define, the single file component. Data, the return. Okay, so that's the message we're going to be displayed here. Okay, welcome to Vue. Maybe I call it single file component. I'll wrap it here. Essentially, just and you can add some formatting if you want. And in this case, we probably don't even need formatting. Okay, and then yeah, so that's our Vue first .view file. And then I already installed everything you need, both the CRI and CRI service global. And then I can just run like this, say view serve followed by the name. We have to run this in the directory where this file is, obviously. Okay, and I'm gonna just do it here. That's my terminal. Let me just check if the file is here. Yeah, so the file I want is here, example. So I just type view serve, and in this case is example.view. Yeah, then that's the process. The first time it will load and try to build something. Okay, and it says, and if you want to, you need to go to that address, open that URL in your browser. So I can just do command click, yeah, and they'll start. Yeah, that's just a line of text we did here. And maybe instead of code, maybe you call it H1, or make it easier to see. Yeah, so you can see once you say make some changes, actually Vue automatically recompile and the page actually automatically refresh as well. This time we have a H1 heading. Yeah, so that's how you run Vue file directly. Yeah, and so we already seen this one. You will see some message and then tells you the URL to open, and you open your browser, you will see the component defined by that single file. Okay, and so the next part is we mentioned before, so we can use the Vue CRI to create like the scaffolding, your Vue app. And that's, we already have the Vue CRI installed, so that's all we need. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use the Vue CRI to create an empty app, essentially, and then move the pet store code to it. Okay. So the way you do it is, okay, I need to just, again, using the Vue, that's what's come with the with the CRI. And instead of saying serve followed by name, you say create followed by app name. And we might call it, say, view create pet store or pet shop, then it will do it. What it will do, it will ask you some questions, and just as if you remember, and we did np, and init, initializing a new node project, and we'll ask you some questions, which will be saved to the package.json file. It's something similar here. It will ask you some questions and will then create the folders and files for you. Okay. And this is what you see if everything runs properly. Okay, let me just do this one now. So I'm gonna stop. Let me make sure. Okay. Huh? Oh, well. Ah. What's empty? Okay. And yeah, so we just say, let me clear this. So we say view, create. Oh, what do we call this? Pet store. Okay, pet store or pet shop or anything. Okay, and then we'll ask you questions. And do you want to use view 2, view 3, or manually select? So view 3 is the latest version, and it's already available, but everything we cover in this module is still based on view 2. Actually, to us, there's not that much difference between view 3 and view 2. There's some new features in view 3, but we didn't really use them. So view 2 will be completely fine. Okay, and then we'll start to run something. So mostly downloading all the node modules needed to run the default CRI template. Okay, and so we see this one now. Yeah. So it tells you if you want to run your brand new app, the default empty app, and all you need to do is go inside this directory, which is the same name as what you called before, and do npm run serve. So you can just start this with an npm run. And the serve is one of the scripts you created in there. So actually here we should be able to see now we have this pet store directory created. These are the files, and in the package.json, and you would have seen this serve script. So you can see what essentially it does. It just say view CRI, oops, and view CRI service. So this is the command line tools when you installed and view CRI global, I believe, and then run serve. That's what actually happens. Okay, let's close this side. So we're going to do exactly that. We're going to go to pet store and then just npm run serve. Then do a build, hopefully quite quickly on your computer. This one, yeah. So it uses the same URL address as the one we done before with the view. When you run the view directly, I forgot now. So the same address as when you say the view serve. So if we refresh the page now, okay, it should look like this. So this is what a empty or a template view app would look like. So some extra, essentially this is like a component, and these have some text, pictures, and then some links in there. That's all. We don't need this really, and we're gonna take it out and replace with our own code soon. Okay, and so this is what you were seeing in the browser. If you just follow all the instructions. Okay, and and what will be useful now is actually to have a look at the files it created for you. Okay, and so you can see it's created a folder called Pet Store, and under that there's lots of different files, and some of these you'll be familiar with. Let me see, yeah, like to say the package.json. So essentially this is still a node project, so we have these files and you're familiar with, and the readme is actually really meant for the GitHub. And then the git ignore also created for you directly already as well. So when you upload, for example, it will automatically exclude node module subdirectory. And this one is actually for Mac. So that's the system files automatically generated by Mac. And this is something new. And this is something actually used. Babel is used to transpile, if you remember, your .view file into HTML and JavaScript files. That is its own configuration, but we're not going to touch that. So the files we will be mostly interested in will be inside the source, and then this one, the app.view, is currently the main file. So that's basically the file responsible to create this page. Okay, and then we have this component and folder. Sorry, the app.view is a main file, so that's where the entire app will start. And then the components folder is where all different components will go. So for example, we created our example.view. If we want to use that as a component, we should put it inside the components subfolder. Okay, and in this case, hello world.view is actually most the contents and resides. So for example, the pictures, the headings, the links is actually not in the app.view. And app.view itself is very simple. You can see it actually defines the logo and the hello world. It actually defines the logo, which give you this picture, but the rest is just call the hello world components, which is imported first here and then registered here, and then just use it here. And there's a little bit of formatting here, which does not really matter. So essentially, the main app.view only just add a picture, and the rest is defined in the app.view, and you import and use it here. So the actual hello world looks like this. So you have some headings and some paragraphs, etc., etc. And here they're actually using the props. And so you can see the MSG is a prop defined here. So the props is the MSG that allows you to set the titles you display here. And in the actual main app.view, you can see when you call the hello world, you give the MSG the props and values. And that itself can be bind to a property. Okay. So that's a folder. Yeah. Oh, there's also this main.js file. Okay. And that's something that's like the main view root instance. But again, there's something you don't really need to touch. You can just leave it as is. and we don't need to make any changes. And the actual HTML file is here, index.html. Again, so we don't need to use this, and because all the view code, it cannot exist by itself. Essentially, it will be turned into JavaScript, and JavaScript has to be attached to some HTML file when you display it in the front end. So that's why you need this. Again, this is something you don't have to worry about. Okay. Yeah, and so we had a quick look over these already. So I don't want to go through these again. So that's the app view, the main file. Really it does, it just import the Hello World components and display it. That's this main row. The Hello World itself actually have the most content there, but it does have this prop we already mentioned. I guess the text for the H1 heading from the parent. Okay, I think we'll stop there just because we are running out of time, and we're going to continue from here next week.